Hello, I'm James Cary. Welcome to The Sacred Art of Joking, a book, a blog, a podcast, a series of YouTube videos. This is the first one. Here we go. My name's James Cary. I write sitcoms for the BBC, like Bluestone 4-2, Miranda, Milton Jones, stuff like that. And I also do a podcast called Sitcom Geeks. I'm also a Christian. I'm a member of the General Synod for the Church of England, somehow. And also I podcast with a man called Barry Cooper, called Cooper and Cary Have Words. And so these two worlds have collided, if you like, the comedy realm, the sitcom realm, and the Christian realm, with a book called The Sacred Art of Joking, which is out this month, January 2019. So how did this book come about? Well, in the intro, I explained a bit about that and how it came. So one of the origins, really, 2008. I interviewed Ben Elton for a magazine I was writing at the time, called Third Way, which is now sadly no longer with us. And I had to interview him in Shepherd's Bush. So they sent me off to interview him because I was a sitcom writer as well. I was working for Radio 4. And it was great for me because I've always wanted to meet him because he wrote Blackadder, a show which I basically memorised and was massively inspired by, and I'm now showing to my kids. Except for the rude episodes. And so we had an interesting chat, which wasn't particularly controversial, I didn't think. He was filming a sitcom which wasn't particularly well received at the time, I think. And he made some comments about the BBC being afraid of Islam in the course of the interview, but neither of us thought much of it because it seemed pretty obvious the BBC were slightly afraid of Islam in 2008. And the interview was published, and then I sort of rather forgot about it. But the day the interview was actually published, the transcript pretty much was published. There was a story in the Times, and suddenly BBC sort of is slammed by Ben Elton for being afraid of Islam. And I sort of saw a bit of the interview, quoted and snipped out, and I thought, oh right, yes, no, he did say that, and neither of us thought that was particularly problematic at the time. And suddenly it became a news story. For 24 hours, this kind of BBC sitcom religion story became a sort of swirling vortex. And so I ended up that night on Newsnight, which was fun. And it was fairly relaxing for me because I didn't feel I had to defend particularly what Ben Elton was saying. He wasn't available. He was living in Australia at the time. And after things like this, you can't really blame him. And so I was then also on a BBC World Service phone-in called World Have Your Say with an extremely radical Muslim cleric who liked to say what a good sense of humour he had. He went to prison also for radicalising people and recruiting for radical groups. So make of that what you will. And so then it sort of all blew itself out. The news cycle moved on as it tends to. But in a way I shouldn't have been surprised by that because a couple of years earlier I was involved in the Greenbelt Festival, which is like a Christian arts festival, which is sort of like, latitude with praying. And I took part in a session, or was in planning to, organised by a website called The Ship of Fools, which is a very funny, interesting website run by some very nice men. And they invited me to take part and read out some jokes that were deemed to be the most offensive jokes. And I thought, well, I'm a comedy writer, I can probably take it. And then I read the jokes and thought, wow, I can't read these out. In fact, they are so offensive about Jesus and, for example, his wounds and sexualizing them, that I thought I can't even be in the same room that these jokes are read out. So, so I withdrew from that. And that somehow became a story in the Times. It was August, and in those days nothing happened in August, and it was sort of silly season. So that I contributed to silly season. And again, I suppose that shouldn't in itself have been too much of a surprise because the year before that I had been sort of taking notice of Jerry Springer the Opera, which was a very successful West End show, which then became broadcast on the BBC, and that upset quite a lot of people, and tens of thousands of people complained to the BBC. And in the book I talk about whether they were right or wrong to do that, and why I didn't complain to the BBC, even though I enjoyed half of it but found half of it extremely offensive. So this all happened pre-Twitter, which is kind of interesting. And suffice to say, Twitter has not made discussing jokes and religion and offence any easier, despite the fact that it has made public discourse easier. It's actually made it harder to talk about things properly. And since then, we've had things like Charlie Hebdo and jokes that not only become news stories, but they can actually get you killed. So I decided to write a book about that. And I think it's also timely because, I mean, the good sense of humour is really important. And so we think comedy is important and that jokes are worth defending on some level. And so, we have dating columns, at least when they existed, had good sense of humour. And we like politicians to be able to take a joke and have a good sense of humour. And, there's the idea of the celebrity roast, which is like a best man speech, really, isn't it? And we like to humiliate people. And if they can't take a joke, it doesn't look good. So when Donald Trump doesn't turn up to the first president's correspondence dinner, it doesn't look very good. It looks like he's got a thin skin, and we don't respect that. So there's that context as well. And now every week, almost every day, throws up a new story about someone being offended by a joke, and that this becomes a news story. So we've recently had Louis C.K., who is rehabilitating himself. I think lots of people don't particularly want him to be rehabilitated for his behaviour in some ways. If somebody gets appointed to a high position or is asked to do the Oscars or whatever, now people just go through their Twitter feed for the last 8 years and then start pulling out bits that don't read so well anymore. So that's why this book exists, really. It's trying to get our heads around the importance of context and the importance of understanding offence, and why Christians in particular should be a little bit more thick-skinned, and we go into detail on that. So the book is about why jokes go wrong, especially in the realm of religion, and I hope you enjoy it. So I'll be speaking at various places around the country as well in the coming years. So look at my website for that, which is jamescary.co.uk. Cary spelled C-A-R-Y, as in Cary Grant, not as in Archbishop Cary. My book, The Sacred Art of Joking, is out this month in the UK in January and out in March in the US. And you can pre-order a copy at my website or via Amazon if you must, or if you're abroad. And the links for that are below. Thanks very much for being with me on The Sacred Art of Joking, and I'll speak to you next time.